Hello, team players. So, PaizoCon is now over, which means it's time for me to get back to Howl the Wild content. And I think today I'm going to finally cover the ancestries. And what better one to start with than the Centaur? Let's dive in. Even though Centaurs are large size, they only get 8 ancestry hit points. But they also have the same speed as elves do, 30 feet. Their attribute boosts are Strength, Wisdom, and a free boost with an ability flaw in Charisma, making them great martial characters as well as Wisdom-based casters. But they're not so great when it comes to Charisma-based casters. Centaurs also start with a few special abilities. They have Dark Vision and the Robust ability, allowing them to carry 2 more bulk than their strength would normally allow them to. In addition, Centaurs are so good at being mounts that another PC can ride you if they are 1 size category smaller than you instead of 2 sizes category smaller than you. So medium characters can ride Centaurs, while other large size ancestries can only carry small PCs. This definitely has teamwork applications, which I'll get to later in this video. For heritages, we have the Budding Speaker Centaur. When you pick this heritage, choose Divine or Primal. If you choose Divine, you're a Faith Speaker. If you choose Primal, you're a Green Speaker. You gain 1 cantrip from your chosen spell list. This works like any other cantrip. This is fantastic if you're a Centaur that isn't a spellcaster, as if you pick Primal, you can get a ranged attack if you don't already have one. Unfortunately, this cantrip does go off Charisma and not Wisdom, making this heritage not the best. But if you pick Divine, you can pick a support spell like Forbidding Ward, say, which would be awesome on a tank. Luckily, you can do that with the Primal list as well. So if you go with this heritage, I recommend picking up a support spell that doesn't have a spell attack roll or DC. Next, we have what I consider to be the best Centaur heritage, the Fleetwind Centaur. It's simple but very effective. Your speed increases by 5 feet. There are quite a few applications for this heritage. For example, taking this and the Fleet General feat means you have a speed of 40 feet. Before armor, obviously, which is great for monks and any spellcaster. But this is also good for tanks, because assuming that you have enough strength for the armor, Fleetwind Centaurs can have as much speed as an elf without armor while wearing full plates. And if you're playing a Centaur, more than likely you're going to have enough strength for the armor. And if you take the Fleet General feats, then you're even faster than a base elf while wearing full plates. This heritage is pretty insane. Then we get to the Ironhoof Centaur, which gives you a Hooves unarmed attack that deals 1d6 bludgeoning damage. These are in the Brawling Weapon group and have the Agile and Unarmed traits. If you're looking for an unarmed attack on a build that isn't the monk, this might be the feat for you. But there are other ways of getting unarmed attacks that do lethal damage without this heritage. Our next heritage is okay. With the Model Coat Centaur, you select one of the following terrain: Arctic, Desert, Forest, Mountain, Plains, or Swamp. While in the selected terrain, you get a +1 circumstance bonus to stealth checks to hide or sneak, and to deception checks to feint. This one is good if you know you're going to be in a certain terrain a lot, but otherwise it's way too situational. But assuming that you are in a particular terrain a lot, this heritage is actually pretty good for rogues. Granted, there are only certain rogues that a Centaur would be good for, but this heritage would be good for them. Moving on, we have the Ponygate Centaur, which means you are medium instead of large. But you always gain a +1 circumstance bonus to reflex saving throw, which can be good for certain Centaurs, especially for classes that aren't exactly good at reflex save. And the final Centaur heritage is the Stoutheart Centaur. You gain 10 ancestry hit points rather than 8. You also gain a +1 circumstance bonus to acrobatics checks to balance, and to your reflex DCs to avoid being tripped. This one is very good for centaurs that take martial classes, in particular tanks, as being tripped is not fun for martial characters. And tanks will appreciate the +1 on checks to balance, as that is one of their main weaknesses, since their dex won't be high. Overall, for heritages, I think that the Fleetwind and the Stoutheart Centaur are the best one. The others are pretty good if you've got the right build, otherwise they're pretty situational. Now let's talk about what I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for, Centaur feats. For first level, we're going to start with Centaur lore. This is pretty much your standard lore ancestry feats. Medicine, nature, and additional lore for Centaur lore. Now what's interesting about this one is I believe it's the only lore ancestry feat that gives you medicine as a skill. Now obviously you can pick up medicine without this feat, but if you're a class that's low on skills and want medicine in addition to other skills, you may want to consider taking this feat. Otherwise you may be better off picking something else. And of course, we've got Centaur Weapon Familiarity. For the purposes of proficiency, you treat any martial lances, longbows, long spears, short bows, and spears as simple weapons rather than martial weapons. In addition, at 5th level, you get the critical specialization effects for these weapons. Again, pretty standard feat here. Next up for level 1 is Practiced Brawn. This gives you a +1 bonus on athletics checks to force open and shove. This also applies to fortitude saves against being fatigued. Also, if you roll a success on an athletics check to shove, you get a critical success instead. This one is good for that shove, but it would be a lot better if it applied to trips and grapples instead of just shoves and force open. But if there are hazards in the environment, this is a good feat. And of course, shoving an opponent into a position where they'll be flanked is a good thing to do. But overall, the feat, the way it is kind of situational. Next we've got Skilled Herbalist. You gain the alchemical crafting feat, but must select the following items for your formula book. Lesser Antidote, Lesser Anti-Plague, and Minor Elixir of Life. The 4th item for your book can be any common first level alchemical item. In addition, while crafting an alchemical item with the healing trait, you can use nature for the check instead of crafting. This feat is really good for druids, as you're going to have high wisdom because druid, and you're going to be automatically trained in nature. Plus druids are really good at out of combat healing, and this just makes them better at it. Especially since with this feat, you do not even need to be trained in crafting to make alchemical items, as long as they have the healing traits. But you might want to be trained in crafting anyway, just so you can make the 4th item in your book, and any other non-healing alchemical items you happen to pick up the formulas for. But overall, great feat for wisdom-based characters, especially if they're trained in nature like druids are. And finally, for first level ancestry feats, we have Steel Hoof, which requires the Iron Hoof Centaur heritage. Your hoof attack now deals 1d8 damage rather than 1d6. That's it, that's all this feat does. Honestly, not a great feat here because it just ups the damage. But it is pretty decent with a feat we're going to talk about later in this video. Overall, for Centaur first level feats, 2 of them are pretty standard for all ancestries. 2 of them are incredibly good on the right character, and one of them is just a little extra damage if you're the right heritage. But don't worry, the Centaur gets way better as it levels up. Speaking of which, it's time to talk about 5th level ancestry feats and accommodating mounts. When another PC rides you as a mount, they get their normal 3 actions instead of the 2 actions they normally gain from riding you as a mount. However, you still only gain 2 actions, as you must still spend 1 action making sure they don't fall off. Imagine this on a monk with a tank in the party. They could ride you and still get all 3 of their actions, and you're the one moving, so you're essentially giving them the speed of a monk. In addition, if there's something like a champion, they can protect you because I guarantee you they will be within 15 feet of you. Also, the fact that you only get 2 actions doesn't matter. because, flurry of blows. Or, if you want to use athletics actions, you can just take flurry of maneuvers. If you are a monk and you have a tank in the party that wears a whole bunch of armor, you might consider taking this feat. Most centaurs probably won't take this though, as for a lot of builds, it isn't that great. But if you're okay with only having 2 actions per round, this can be absolutely amazing in the right party. Next we have Distant Archer. You reduce the penalty for attacking beyond your first range increment by 1 to a minimum of 0, as long as you are using a weapon from the bow weapon group. I don't really like this feat because most of the time you're going to be shooting in your first range increment, especially if you're using a bow. But there are applications for this, as there are situations where enemies are outside your first range increment. But those situations don't happen very often, which makes this feat incredibly situational. Especially since you have to use a bow to even get this. Not a great feat here. Unlike Proud Mentor. With this feat, you can no longer critically fail on aid checks, which effectively means you will never give your ally a penalty for trying to aid them. In addition, if you successfully aid a creature that critically succeeded on their roll, you get temporary hit points equal to your level for 1 minute. If you're a class that doesn't have many reactions, this can be absolutely insane. Combine this with the adopted ancestry feat for human, so you can take aid feats that humans get, and you can make aid an absolutely insane teamwork option. If you don't take accommodating mount, take this one, please. And finally, for level 5, we have Speaker in Training. You must be a budding Speaker Centaur, or be able to cast a Divine or Primal spell. Choose Divine or Primal. If you choose Divine, you're a Faith Speaker. If you choose Primal, you're a Green Speaker. If you've already made the choice between Divine and Primal, you must select that spell list for this feat. This choice cannot be changed. If you chose Divine for this feat, then you can cast Bless as a once per day Divine innate spell. If you chose Primal for this feat, then you can cast Fleet Step as a once per day primal innate spell. Bless is a really good teamwork spell, as you're giving your allies a +1 to hits. And Fleet Step is pretty good as well, as you can be pretty fast with this feat even if you aren't a monk. Granted, the combo I mentioned earlier is better with a monk simply because it doesn't matter that you only have 2 actions. But if you want to be extremely fast and you're not a monk, Fleet Step is a great spell to use, especially if you're a Centaur tank. Alright, for level 9 feats, we've got a lot to talk about. First up is Herbal Forager, which requires skilled herbalists to take. Each day, as part of your daily preparations, you can create 1 temporary alchemical item. It must be a healing item, and you must have the formula for it. Also, you must use this alchemical item by the end of the day, otherwise it is rendered inert. This feat, combined with skilled herbalists, makes centaurs great herbalists and medics. You can also use this pretty effectively with the Trojan Alchemists. Although that's its current version, I'm not sure how this is going to work with the remastered version of the Trojan. We will have to see when in Player Core 2 comes out. Next up, we have Fierce Competitor. For 1 action, once per day, you can challenge an ally to a contest. This contest must involve a specific goal using a specific use of acrobatics or athletics. So like climbing a wall or tripping a specific foe. You and the ally gain a +2 circumstance bonus to the associated skill for 1 minute or until one of you wins the challenge. If you win the challenge, you get a +2 bonus on intimidation checks for 1 hour. This can be really good out of combat, especially if you win the challenge. But depending on your party, it can also be really good in combat. For example, in a boss fight, you might both be trying to trip the boss. In which case, both of you getting a +2 on that is pretty insane. And of course, if you win, then you get to intimidate them at a +2 as well. Overall, I think this is a very good feat here. But the in-combat applications do depend on your party. As if it's just you and a bunch of spellcasters, not great. Then it's Mentor of Legends. Once per day, you can cast Heroism as a Divine Innate spell. And in addition to its normal effects, the spell also grants temporary hit points equal to half your level. However, you cannot cast this spell on yourself. Heroism is already such a good spell, and this just makes it even better. Granted, you can't cast it on yourself, and it is a once per day thing. However, it can still make all the difference in the world. And remember, any Centaur can take this feat, even if they're not a spellcaster, making this feat incredible for martial characters. Next up is Ride On. Once per hour as a reaction, if you would gain the fatigue condition, you can delay it for 3 rounds. If the fatigue condition has a duration, it doesn't begin until after the delay. However, once you use this feat, it cannot be used again to delay the same fatigue condition. Fatigued is such a rare condition. It's honestly not even worth taking this feat, to be honest with you. I've played a lot of Pathfinder 2e over the years, and the only time I've ever been fatigued is when I'm over encumbered. And let's be honest, that hardly ever happens. And it will happen even less often with the Centaur, because of the robust ability. Because the Centaurs have a boost to strength, and they can carry 2 more bulk than their strength would normally allow, this effectively means that the fatigue condition will hardly ever come up. It is a bad condition to have, but I just don't think you're going to run into it all that often. But if you do run into it more often than I have, then go ahead and take this feat, absolutely. But I just don't think that will be the case. Next, we've got another feat that gives you some spells with Speaker's Defense. You must be a budding Speaker Centaur or have Speaker in training as a feat. If you're a Faith Speaker, you gain shared life and status as Divine Innate spells that you can cast once per day each. If you're a Green Speaker, you get Entangling Flora and Environmental Endurance as once per day Primal Innate spells. All these spells are actually really good, although Environmental Endurance is actually pretty situational. But the rest of them, absolutely great spells. If you're a champion Centaur, then you absolutely want to be a Faith Speaker because of this feat. Although Entangling Flora is pretty good on tanks as well. But overall, definitely consider this one at level 9. And the last feat for level 9 is Stubborn Defiance. You gain a +1 status bonus on saves against mental effects. You also gain the I Defy You reaction. Once per hour as a reaction, if you would fail a save against a mental effect, you can re-roll that save, but you must take the second results. If you're running into a lot of mental effects and have low wisdom, this could be a great feat. However, since you are playing a Centaur, your wisdom is guaranteed to be at least decent. It definitely won't be that great for all Centaurs. And it won't be good for all campaigns either. It depends on how many mental effects you're running into. So it is a little situational. For level 13, we're going to start with Camouflage Coat. This one requires the Model Coat Centaur Heritage. While you're in the terrain selected for your Model Coat Centaur Heritage, you can hide and sneak without cover or concealment. Again, since you have to be in a specific terrain to even use this, it's pretty situational. But if you're in that terrain a lot, this can be incredibly useful for the certain types of rogues that Centaurs can be good for. For example, Ruffian Rogue Centaurs will love this feat. Assuming, of course, that they're in that type of terrain a lot. But again, situational feat here, just like the Heritage is incredibly situational. Moving on, we have Incredible Sprint. For 2 actions, you can stride 3 times. Again, pretty situational feat here. As unless you are really far away from the enemy that you want to attack, this really isn't going to be a great thing to do. Don't get me wrong, this is fantastic action economy if you're far enough away to actually make this worth it. But if you're already pretty close, as is the case with most encounters, you're probably going to be able to get to the enemy in one action rather than spending 2 actions to strike 3 times. So overall, situational feat, but is good in the right situation. Next is Miraculous Medic. You can cast Breath of Life as an innate primal spell once per day. For most characters, this is going to be the best feat here, as just being able to say no to death once per day, regardless of what class you are, is pretty fantastic. And Breath of Life heals a lot as well, even at level 13 when you can pick up this feat. And finally, we have a feat that is incredible for monks, with Trample. For 3 actions, you can stride up to double your speed. You can move through the spaces of any creature that is at least one size category smaller than you, trampling them along the way. But you can only trample a given creature once per use of this feat. You deal bludgeoning damage to each creature you trample equal to that of your hoof attack, unless you don't have one, in which case you use your unarmed strike damage. These creatures can attempt a basic reflex save against this damage. This is against your class DC. With as much speed as a monk has, you can probably trample through a lot of enemies with this feat. And as long as you don't take the heritage that gives you a hoof attack, you're doing your unarmed strike damage to every creature you trample, which means Hand of Mighty Blows do apply. So even if you don't have the better hoof attack, you can still do pretty good damage to enemies that you trample. Unfortunately, this does not trip them. But if you need to get to one side of the battlefield from the other, then you might as well trample all the enemies along the way. I mean, why not? Merge with the Source is another one that requires the budding speaker Centaur heritage or speaker in training. If you're a faith speaker, you can cast either angel form, demon form, or devil form as a once per day 7th rank divine innate spell. If you're a green speaker, you can select elemental form or plant form as a primal innate spell. All these are pretty good defensive options, especially if you're a spellcaster. But overall, they simply help you. They don't help anybody else in the party, not really. Other than just more damage and more defense for you, which I guess keeps you up. But remember that you cannot cast spells in these forms, so it's pretty limiting. Starshot Arrow, on the other hand, is actually pretty darn good. For one action, you make a ranged strike. You change the damage of your ranged strike to force or spirit damage, and it gains the effects of a ghost touch weapon rune. When the ammunition strikes the target, it also imposes a minus 10 foot status penalty to their speed for 2d4 rounds. Or if the strike was a critical hit, the target is immobilized for the same duration. However, the target can spend 1 interact action to break free. Keep in mind, to impose this, all you have to do is hit. There is no saving throw against this effect. And if you crit, they're stuck right where they're at. But combine this with difficult terrain, and your enemy is going to have a very hard time getting to people that don't want to be gotten to. Great for any party that has members that don't want to be in melee. However, this does require a ranged attack, which means your dex needs to be high to really take advantage of this feat. Luckily, Centaurs don't get a penalty to dex, and they do get a free ability boost. So theoretically, this could be good for any Centaur, assuming that Centaur has high dexterity. But it depends on your build. And that's pretty much everything you need to know about the Centaur. Overall, I gotta say, Centaurs make excellent monks. There are a number of feats in this ancestry that can take huge advantage of the monk's crazy speed, or make tanks faster than they normally would be. I had heard that the Centaur was going to be good for teamwork, and it 100% is, for the right classes. But there are some classes like sorcerers who Centaurs do not make good characters with. But I would consider the Centaur when you're picking your ancestry 100%. Let me know in the comments which ancestry from Howl the Wild you guys want me to cover next. And of course, let me know what you think of the Centaur. I'll also put a poll in my community tab, so be sure to check that out. But if you want my videos early, you can become a member of this channel or join me on my Patreon page. For the people that already have, thank you so much. Your contribution helps me a lot. And if you haven't, links are in the description. And if you want to talk to me and other people about teamwork in Pathfinder 2e or Starfinder 2e, you can check out my Discord, also in the description. But maybe you guys are more interested in Druid and Barbarian abilities in this book. If you are, I have a video for that right here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.